I never thought a quiet suburban street could feel like a battlefield. But the night my wife's ventilator went dark and I heard her choking for air in the next room, I realized we weren't just fighting for peace anymore. We were fighting for survival. And the sickest part? The woman who caused it stood outside smirking, arms crossed, as if she had won some petty war over lawn heights and mailbox paint. What she didn't know was that someone very important had been watching everything unfold live. But before I tell you how my father, a sitting judge, witnessed the worst moment of our lives in real time, let me take you back. Because nothing about this nightmare started suddenly. It was like rot creeping under the floorboards. And like all rot, it began with small, almost invisible cracks. When my wife and I first moved into Willow Creek Estates, we thought we'd found heaven. The streets were lined with oak trees, their branches weaving into green tunnels that whispered in the wind. Houses looked like they were lifted straight from a catalog, white fences, trimmed lawns, front porches with swings. We wanted quiet. We wanted safety. Most of all, we wanted stability for my wife, Emily. Emily had been through hell. A car accident years ago had left her partially paralyzed and reliant on a ventilator to breathe during flare-ups. The sound of that machine, soft rhythmic hisses, became the background music of our life together. I grew to find comfort in it. When it hummed steady, I could sleep. When it faltered, I shot up in panic. Our home had to be more than just pretty, it had to be safe, and for a while it was. Neighbors waved when we moved in. Some brought pies. The HOA president, a woman named Karen, was the first to show up at our door. She was tall, sharp-shouldered, and wore perfume so heavy it clawed at my throat. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said, scanning the boxes stacked on our porch. "I do hope you'll keep your lawn tidy. The HOA here has very high standards." It was meant to be friendly, I think, but it landed like a warning. At first, Emily brushed it off. "She's just particular," she said, wheeling herself through the living room, her auburn hair catching the light from the big bay window. "Some people need control to feel important." But it wasn't long before Karen's need for control bled into our lives. The first letter arrived a week later. Violation notice, trash bins visible from street, fine $50. I stared at it baffled. The bins had been out for exactly 1 hour before the truck came. The second letter came days later. Violation notice, porch light bulb too dim, fine $75. Emily laughed at that one. Since when is mood lighting a crime? I wanted to laugh too, but something in me tightened. It wasn't about light bulbs or trash bins, it was about pressure. Still, we tried to be the perfect neighbors. I repainted the mailbox. I trimmed the grass twice a week. Emily planted flowers along the walkway, even though it exhausted her. We thought if we showed effort, Karen would back off. We were wronged. One humid afternoon, Emily had a flare-up. Her chest tightened, her breaths came shallow. I rushed to set up her ventilator in the living room so she could breathe easier while I cooked. The sound of the machine filled the space, steady, life-giving. That's when the knock came. Karen stood at the door, her perfume invading before she even spoke. "Mr. Miller," she said sharply, "several neighbors have complained about noises." I blinked. Noises. "Yes, that machine." She gestured toward the ventilator, visible from the door. "It's disruptive." For a second I thought she was joking, but her face was stone. "That's my wife's medical equipment," I snapped. "She needs it to breathe." Karen's lip curled. "I'm not heartless, but rules are rules. Noise should be minimal. Perhaps you could move her to the back of the house." Behind me, Emily's eyes widened, tears brimming. I slammed the door. That was the first time I realized Karen wasn't just strict, she was dangerous. And yet the cracks weren't only coming from her. They came from inside my own family, too. See, my father wasn't just any man. He was Judge Robert Miller, a name that carried weight in our city. Growing up, my siblings and I lived under the shadow of his gavel. He was fair but stern, a man who believed in law above all else. I thought he'd retired from judging my choices once I married Emily, but I was wrong. "Son," he said one night on a video call, his white hair glowing in the lamplight of his office. "I've read about HOAs like this. You have to document everything. Don't lose your temper, stay lawful." His advice made sense, but I heard the subtext: prove yourself, don't disappoint me. Emily, fragile and exhausted, whispered after the call, "I don't think he believes me, or us." I kissed her forehead, smelling the faint lavender shampoo she loved. "He'll come around." But deep down, I wasn't sure. The real storm didn't break until Karen showed her hand. She wasn't just going to fine us, harass us, or shame us. She was going to take something vital. And it started on a night so sweltering, the air itself felt hostile. I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of silence. No hum, no hiss. I bolted upright, heart pounding. The ventilator was dead. Emily's body arched, desperate for air, her fingers clawing at the sheets. "Emily," I screamed, fumbling for the backup power. Nothing, the whole house was dark. Outside, through the window, I caught sight of a shadowy figure walking calmly back toward their porch light, the only one glowing on the block. Karen. My blood ran cold. And that's when my phone buzzed. A video call request, my father. I answered in chaos, Emily gasping, the machine dead, my hands shaking. And on his screen he saw everything, every desperate second. I'll never forget his face, pale with disbelief, as he asked, "Son, who did this?" My father's question hung in the air. Son, who did this? The weight of it pressed on my chest harder than the darkness around me. I wanted to scream Karen's name, spit it into the night like venom, but something inside me froze. Maybe it was years of conditioning under my father's stern gaze. Maybe it was fear that numbing her too soon would somehow weaken my case. But in that moment, with Emily clawing for breath, I was dragged backward into memories I'd tried so hard to bury. Because this wasn't the first time someone had stolen her air. Growing up in the Miller household meant you lived under rules tighter than any HOA covenant. My father's word was final. My older brother, David, learned that early. He was the golden child, the one who wore ties to family dinners and quoted legal statutes before dessert. He was meticulous, brilliant, and according to my father, destined for greatness. Me, I was the emotional one, the dreamer, the boy who drew in margins instead of taking notes. "You'll never survive on feelings," my father told me when I was 16, his voice like a hammer in our oak-paneled kitchen. "Law doesn't bend for emotions." I remember staring at David across the table, his smug smirk hidden behind a glass of milk. My fists clenched under the table. That favoritism cut deeper than any punishment. My mother tried to soften it with gentle pats on my shoulder, whispered reassurances that I was special in a different way. But the truth was clear. In my father's eyes, only one of us measured up. That pattern followed me into adulthood. When I introduced Emily to my family, I braced myself. She was radiant, even in her wheelchair, her laughter bright enough to light any room, but my father's smile never reached his eyes. "A strong woman," he said flatly, "but a burden." I'll never forget the way Emily's hand squeezed mine under the table, silently telling me not to fight, but my blood boiled. "She's not a burden," I snapped. "She's my wife." David cleared his throat, sipping his wine. "Dad's just being practical, little brother. You know he means well." No, he didn't. He meant exactly what he said. And in that moment, I swore to myself I'd never let Emily feel like less than she was. But favoritism has a way of bleeding into every part of your life, even when you think you've escaped it. That night, as Emily's ventilator lay dead and my father's voice came through the phone, I realized the old patterns were still alive. He wasn't just asking me who cut the power. He was testing me, waiting to see if I'd crumble like the emotional child he always thought I was. And Karen, she knew exactly how to exploit cracks like those. Flashback again, 2 weeks before the blackout. It was a Sunday morning, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass. I was repainting the fence when Karen marched up, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a metronome of doom. "Mr. Miller," she began, nasal and sharp, "the HOA has noticed some irregularities with your home." I wiped sweat from my brow. "What now, Karen?" She frowned at the familiarity. "Firstly, your wife's medical equipment. It produces noise beyond acceptable decibel levels." I laughed bitterly. "It's a ventilator, Karen. Without it, she can't breathe." She tilted her head, lips pursed. "I sympathize, but rules are rules. If exceptions are made for you, they'll be demanded by others. Fairness is the backbone of community." I wanted to scream that fairness wasn't the same as cruelty, but I bit my tongue. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "Document, don't lose your temper." So I snapped a photo of her, clipboard and all, while she scowled. "This harassment is documented," I said coldly. Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mr. Miller, threats don't end well in Willow Creek." As she walked away, I noticed curtains shifting in the houses around us. Neighbors watching, whispering, some sympathetic, some entertained, none brave enough to intervene. That night, Emily and I lay in bed, the ventilator hissing softly beside her. She traced circles on my palm with her finger, her voice barely above a whisper. Why does she hate us so much? I kissed her hair, because she can't control us. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that chilled me. She looks at me like I'm weak, but maybe she's the weak one because she needs to fight someone to feel strong. Her words stuck with me because she was right. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was feeding on power, leeching it from those who couldn't fight back. And Emily, sitting in her chair with tubes and machines, became her perfect target. But Karen didn't act alone. Enablers circled her like flies around sugar. One of them was Mark, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down. He was the type who polished his car every Saturday and complained if a leaf landed on his driveway. I overheard him one evening at the mailbox, whispering with Karen. "She's right, you know," he said, glancing toward our house. "We can't let exceptions slide. First it's noise, next it'll be who knows." Karen nodded solemnly, as if discussing national security. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just a tyrant, she was building a coalition. And yet the most painful betrayal wasn't from neighbors. It came from my own brother. I'd called David one night, desperate for support. "She's escalating," I said. "She's targeting Emily, I need help." David sighed on the other end. "Look, I get it, she's tough, but maybe if you just compromise, follow the rules to the letter, Dad always said." "Dad always said," I cut him off, rage boiling. "This isn't about Dad, David, this is about Emily's life." A long pause, then his voice, cool as ice. "Don't be dramatic, she's not going to kill anyone over rules." My hand shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone. But 2 weeks later, when Emily gasped for breath in the dark, I realized just how wrong he was. Back in the present, my father's face filled the phone screen. His judge's eyes scanned the chaos, Emily choking, me fumbling in the dark. For once, his mask cracked. "Call 911, he barked. "I already did," I shouted, fumbling for the backup battery again. Nothing. Then from outside, faint through the silence, came the sound that would haunt me forever. Laughter. Karen's laughter. It floated through the night like poison, mingling with the desperate rasp of my wife's struggle. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just harassment, it was attempted murder. But the real question was, would my father finally believe me now, or would his loyalty to law blind him again? The sirens cut through the night like knives. Red and blue lights washed over our house as paramedics stormed in. I held Emily's hand, whispering prayers while they scrambled to stabilize her, their movements fast, precise, terrifyingly urgent. The ventilator hissed again once they connected the portable battery pack. Her chest rose. Relief nearly dropped me to my knees. But relief wasn't victory. Not when I could still see her face, pale and drenched in sweat, eyes wide with the memory of suffocation. Not when outside, Karen stood on her porch, sipping tea like nothing had happened. My father's voice cut through my thoughts from the phone screen, his tone sharp and controlled. "Stay calm, tell the officers everything, do not confront her yourself." But calm wasn't in my vocabulary anymore. The officers arrived minutes later, notepad in hand. One of them, Officer Jacobs, looked weary, like he'd been through this neighborhood before. "What happened here?" he asked, eyes flicking between me and Emily's lifeline of tubes. "She cut the power," I snapped, pointing toward Karen's house. "My wife was on a ventilator, she almost died." Jacobs scribbled something. "Do you have proof?" Proof, the word sliced deeper than any knife. It wasn't enough that I'd seen her shadow, that I'd heard her laugh. Without proof, it was just my word against hers. And in this neighborhood, Karen's word carried weight. "I saw her," I said firmly. "I know it was her." Karen, as if on cue, walked closer, robe tied neatly, mug in hand. "Officers," she greeted sweetly. "What seems to be the trouble?" I nearly lunged, but Jacobs raised a hand. "Sir, let us handle this." Karen's eyes flicked to Emily inside, then back to me. Her lips curved in that infuriating smirk. "Oh dear, power outage, terrible luck, the whole block must have been affected." "No," I growled, "not the whole block, just us." Jacobs looked at her, then at me. "Ma'am, did you notice any issues tonight?" "None at all," she said smoothly. "My lights were on the entire time. Perhaps their wiring is substandard." I could feel my father watching on the phone, silent but present. And I could feel the old weight pressing on me, the pressure to prove myself, to not just be the emotional son who cried wolf. So I forced myself to inhale steady and said, "Check the breaker box, check the lines, someone tampered with them." Jacobs hesitated, then nodded to his partner. Have a look." As they disappeared around the house, Karen leaned in close, voice low enough that only I could hear. "You're making a scene, Mr. Miller. That doesn't bode well in Willow Creek." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "You tried to kill her." Karen chuckled softly. "Kill? Don't be dramatic. Accidents happen, and if you can't handle the rules here, perhaps you should leave." The word leave carried more menace than any threat I'd ever heard. Before I could reply, the officers returned. "Sir," Jacob said carefully, "your breaker was manually flipped." My stomach dropped. Proof, finally proof. Karen's mask cracked for just a second, her lips tightened, her eyes flashing, but she recovered quickly. "Well," she said, smiling, "anyone could have done that. Teenagers, mischief, you can't seriously think." But I cut her off, voice shaking with fury. "I saw you, and I heard you laughing." The silence that followed was electric. Neighbors peeked through blinds, hungry for drama. Emily, weak but conscious, whispered my name from inside, and my father's voice, sharp as a gavel, came through the phone. "Press charges." But pressing charges wasn't that simple. The officers exchanged looks, reluctant. "We'll need to file a full report," Jacobs said, "but without direct evidence of who flipped the breaker." Karen's smirk returned. "I trust you'll do the right thing, officers. False accusations are very serious." My blood boiled. She was winning again. That night, after the chaos settled and Emily was stable, I sat alone in the darkened living room, the portable ventilator humming beside me. My father's face appeared on the laptop, live via his secure conferencing system. He hadn't hung up once, not through all the madness. "You need to be smart," he said, eyes piercing mine. "This isn't just neighborly harassment. This is criminal endangerment, but law requires evidence, cameras, logs, witnesses." I rubbed my temples. She knows how to cover herself. She's got half the neighborhood under her thumb. "Then you outsmart her," he said firmly. "This isn't just about Emily anymore. This is about exposing corruption." For once I heard something different in his tone, not disappointment, not cold judgment. Urgency, fear. And I realized, my father, the man who rarely showed emotion, had been shaken to his core by what he saw. Over the next few days, I transformed our home into a fortress. Security cameras hidden under eaves, motion sensors on the breaker box, backup batteries checked and rechecked. Emily watched me from her chair, her voice soft but firm. "You're changing." I paused mid-drill. "I have to." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Don't let her turn you into someone else." I knelt beside her, taking her hand. "She tried to take you from me. I'll never forgive that." Emily squeezed weakly. "Forgive me for saying this, but it's not just her you're fighting, is it?" I froze. She saw straight through me like she always did. No, it wasn't just Karen. It was my father's shadow, David's dismissive voice, years of being doubted. This was about proving I wasn't the weak link, the emotional liability. But I couldn't admit that, not yet. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a blistering afternoon when I caught Karen on camera. She stood at my breaker box, clipboard in hand, pretending to inspect something. My phone buzzed with the live feed, her face framed perfectly in the lens. I stormed outside, phone in hand. "Caught you," I shouted. Karen spun, her mask slipping. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, but only for a moment. "Mr. Miller," she said smoothly, "I was simply ensuring your setup was compliant. You wouldn't want faulty wiring causing another blackout, would you?" I shoved the phone screen toward her. "Compliant? You were tampering with my breaker." Neighbors gathered, murmuring, phones raised. And then I asked the question that changed everything, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "What kind of person tries to kill a disabled woman over HOA rules?" The crowd gasped, Karen's face paled. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. But victory didn't come with silence. Instead, it came with a scream. Emily's scream. I bolted back inside to find her slumped forward, the ventilator beeping frantically. The crowd outside blurred into white noise as I rushed to her side, terror gripping my throat. And somewhere behind me, faint but unmistakable, I heard Karen mutter, "This isn't over." Emily's scream ripped through me like glass. One second I was outside, shouting at Karen in front of half the neighborhood. The next I was sprinting back inside, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear. The ventilator alarm shrieked. Its screen flashed red. Emily was slumped in her wheelchair, lips tinged blue, hands trembling as she clutched at the tube. "No, no, no, stay with me," I shouted, fumbling to reset the device. My fingers slipped, slick with sweat. The portable battery pack showed only a sliver of power left. I'd charged it that morning, but something was draining it faster than it should. Panic clawed at me. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the porch. Karen's voice floated in, casual, almost amused. "Oh dear, problems again." I spun, rage boiling over. "Get out." But Emily's strangled gasp pulled me back. I had seconds to act. I tore open the backup case I kept in the hall closet, an emergency kit I prayed I'd never need. Inside, another ventilator, older but still functional. My hands shook as I set it up, plugging the tubing, pressing the start button. The machine hummed weakly to life. Air pushed into Emily's lungs. Her chest rose. Slowly, painfully, color returned to her face. I crumpled to my knees beside her, gripping her hand. "I've got you. Breathe, just breathe." Her eyelids fluttered open, her voice a broken whisper. She's going to kill me." Tears stung my eyes. "Not while I'm alive." The paramedics arrived again, neighbors crowding the street like spectators at some grotesque play. My father's voice still echoed from the laptop I'd left open, a silent witness to everything. "This is escalation," he said grimly when I picked up the phone again. "This isn't negligence, this is deliberate sabotage." And then, for the first time in my life, I heard something in his voice I never expected. Rage. "You file charges tonight," he ordered. "You hear me? Tonight I'll make sure it sticks." I wanted to believe him, but my stomach twisted. Because deep down, I knew the truth. The system wasn't built to protect people like Emily. Not against predators like Karen who wore respectability like armor. That evening after Emily was stabilized at the hospital for observation, I drove back to the house alone. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Porch lights glowed, curtains twitched. Everyone knew what had happened, but no one spoke. Karen's house stood lit up like a Christmas card. She sat on her porch, sipping another mug of tea, legs crossed, looking smug. I stopped at the foot of my driveway, my fists clenched at my sides. "You think you've won?" I called out. She tilted her head, smiling. "Won? Oh, Mr. Miller, this isn't a competition. This is about standards, and clearly you and your wife don't belong here." Her words dripped venom, each syllable deliberate. "Say that again," I growled. Her smile widened. "You don't belong." Something snapped in me. For a split second, I wanted to charge up those steps and tear the smugness off her face. But then my father's voice rang in my head again. Law, evidence, patience. So I did something worse, something she didn't expect. I pulled out my phone, held it high, and said loud enough for every hidden neighbor to hear. "You tried to murder my wife, and I've got the proof." Her smile faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. The next day I met with Detective Harris at the precinct. He was an older man, weary eyes but sharp mind. I laid everything out, videos from the security cams, timestamps, the footage of Karen hovering at my breaker box. He watched in silence, rewinding the clip of her inspection. Finally, he leaned back, rubbing his chin. "This isn't enough for attempted murder," he said, "but it is enough for criminal tampering and reckless endangerment." I slammed my fist on the desk. She cut the power while my wife was on a ventilator. How is that not attempted murder? Harris's eyes softened. "I get it, I really do, but the DA will want more. They'll argue she couldn't know the ventilator would fail, that it was just bad timing." "Bad timing," I spat. She laughed. Harris sighed. "Then we build the case, but you need to keep your wife safe in the meantime." Safe, as if safety existed anymore. When I returned to the hospital, Emily was resting. The room smelled of antiseptic and faint lavender, the scent of the lotion her nurse had used on her hands. I sat beside her, the beeping monitors steady but cold reminders of her fragility. Her eyes opened, hazy but aware. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything." Don't let her take away who we are. Promise me you won't let this break you. I kissed her forehead. I promise, but I won't stop fighting. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. That's why I married you. The shocking incident came that night. I was home alone, exhausted but restless when the sound shattered the quiet. A crash at the back of the house. I grabbed a flashlight, heart pounding, and crept toward the kitchen. The back door rattled violently. A shadow loomed against the frosted glass. My phone buzzed, a live feed alert from the security camera. I pulled it up. And froze. Karen at my back door, holding a pair of wire cutters. My blood turned to ice. I shouted through the door, "I've got you on camera, the police are on their way." For the first time, she looked rattled. She dropped the cutters, eyes wide. Then she bolted into the darkness. I called 911, voice shaking. Within minutes, officers swarmed the property, collecting the cutters, reviewing the footage. Harris himself showed up, his expression grim. "She's escalating," he muttered. "This isn't just harassment anymore, this is obsession." The next morning, the hospital called. Emily had gone into respiratory distress overnight. They managed to stabilize her, but the doctor's voice was grave. "She can't endure much more stress like this. Whatever's happening at home, it's literally killing her." I sat in the sterile hallway, head in my hands, guilt crashing down like a tidal wave. And then my father called. "Son," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've spoken to the DA. They'll move forward if you testify, but it means going public. It means dragging the HOA, your neighbors, everyone into the light. Are you ready for that?" I lifted my head, eyes burning. "If it means saving her, I'll burn the whole damn neighborhood to the ground." But as I drove home, one thought kept clawing at me. If Karen was willing to break into my house with cutters, what would she do next? And worse, what if someone was helping her? Because when I checked the footage again, something didn't add up. She wasn't alone. A second shadow lingered at the edge of the frame. And I knew exactly who it was. I don't remember how I got to the hospital. All I know is one moment I was clutching my wife's hand in the back of the ambulance, watching the paramedics squeeze that oxygen bag to keep her alive. And the next I was stumbling into the sterile, fluorescent light of the like a man who had lost his footing in the middle of a nightmare. The smell of disinfectant hit me first. Too clean, too sharp. It mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood and the plastic scent of latex gloves. My chest burned, my throat was raw from shouting, and my hands trembled as if electricity still ran through them. "Sir, we've got her." A nurse tried to steady me, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. They rushed my wife down the hallway, her pale face barely visible under the tangle of tubes, and the rise and fall of the ventilator machine they had connected her to once more. And then I heard the doctor, short, clipped voice, not cruel, just clinical. "She lost oxygen for several minutes. Possible hypoxic event. Get imaging. We need an arterial blood gas, chest X-ray, and MRI on standby." The words blurred together. Hypoxic event, my wife's brain, my wife's life. I pressed my forehead to the cold wall, every nerve in my body screaming. "Don't you dare leave me," I whispered, like maybe she could hear through the chaos. Then the words came back to me. My father's voice, not calm anymore, but edged with urgency. He had been on the live call, watching through the camera, watching Karen smugly cut my power while his daughter-in-law suffocated in front of him. "Son, listen to me, don't say a word to anyone yet. Document everything. Get the medical reports, get the time-stamped footage. This isn't just assault. This is attempted manslaughter." Attempted manslaughter. My wife was lying under machines that were doing the breathing she couldn't, and already the words carried the weight of a courtroom, of a sentence of justice. But my heart didn't care about justice right then. My heart just wanted her alive. I stood at the end of the ER bay, helpless, watching doctors slide her across to another bed, stick IV lines into her arms, press the cold, plastic mask against her face. The monitors beeped like the ticking of a clock I couldn't stop. And then the X-ray tech came in. They wheeled her off, and I followed like a shadow. Every hallway smelled like bleach. Every room hummed with machinery. I couldn't take my eyes off her chest. Was it rising enough? Were the machines keeping rhythm with her life? The X-rays showed cloudy patches, fluid, pneumonia risk. The doctor explained it like math, but I heard it like thunder. The ventilator disruption caused aspiration. She may have inhaled fluid. We'll need to monitor for infection. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was nod, biting my lip until I tasted iron. When the MRI results came back, the doctor pulled me aside. We need to be honest with you. Her brain scans show possible injury. We won't know the extent until she regains consciousness. She may recover fully or she may have deficits. Memory, speech, motor function. It's too early to say. Deficits, a polite word for damage. I staggered backward, holding onto the edge of a chair. For the first time in years, I felt like a child again. Powerless, fragile, terrified. That's when I saw my father. He arrived in person, not just on a screen. His robe gone, replaced by a gray suit, but the authority clung to him like a second skin. His face was lined with fury, but his eyes softened when they met mine. "Son," he said, and pulled me into an embrace I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. His voice was rough. "She's strong, stronger than she looks, but this crime, Karen won't get away with it, not this time." I nodded, unable to speak. Then, from the doorway, a nurse called, "Family of Mrs. Turner." I rushed forward. "She's stable for now. We've got her on full ventilator support. We need to admit her to ICU." Stable, the most fragile word in the English language. They wheeled her up, machines hissing, monitors beeping, and I followed. My father walked beside me, one hand firm on my shoulder. In the ICU, everything was quieter. The air was heavy with antiseptic and the faint hum of air filters. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, staring at the band around her wrist with her name printed in black ink. That's when the moral storm began. Because my father wasn't just here as a dad. He was here as a judge, a man who had spent his life choosing between loyalty and truth, and now that choice had landed in my lap. He leaned close, his voice was low, measured. "Son, we'll need to decide how far this goes. Karen isn't just a neighbor, she's connected. She's the HOA president. Her brother is on the city council. If this goes public, it'll drag the whole community into it. They'll smear you, your wife, even me." I swallowed hard, staring at my wife's pale face. The faint beep of the heart monitor was the only sound between us. "Are you saying don't press charges?" My voice cracked. "I'm saying," he paused, his jaw tightened. "We have to weigh the cost. Do you want vengeance or do you want peace? Because this will get ugly." "Peace, vengeance." Was peace watching Karen sip wine on her porch while my wife lay in ICU? Was vengeance the only language bullies like her understood? The room felt smaller, my heart pounded. Then the ICU doctor returned, holding a chart. "We'll need to do a bronchoscopy, check for blockage, remove fluid if necessary. You'll need to sign consent." I scribbled my name with a shaking hand. And while they prepped her, I looked at my father. The words came out before I could stop them. "What if it was Mom lying here? Would you choose peace then?" His face changed. He didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. Because even a judge, even a father, couldn't hide behind balance when it was personal. And just as the thought hit, my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number. It was a screenshot of my wife's life support, frozen on a paused screen, captioned with 4 words. "Should have followed the rules." My stomach dropped. Karen, she wasn't done. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was war. The anonymous text with a screenshot proves Karen is taunting them even while his wife is in ICU. The father's dilemma, truth vs. loyalty, will now collide with the son's rage. The message burned on my screen like acid. Should have followed the rules. My hand shook as I stared at the screenshot of my wife's ventilator, paused in time, her fragile body fighting for air. It wasn't just cruel, it was proof. Karen had filmed it. She knew exactly what she'd done, and she had the audacity to taunt me while my wife lay in ICU. I showed the phone to my father. His jaw tightened until I thought it might snap. He paced the hospital room like a lion trapped in a cage. This is evidence. Do you realize what this means, son? It's not just negligence, it's intent." Intent, the word rolled like thunder through my chest. She hadn't accidentally cut the power. She wanted to hurt us. She wanted to watch my wife suffer. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles popped. She has to pay. I don't care if her brother sits on the city council. I don't care if the HOA collapses. She almost killed my wife. She filmed it. My father stopped packing. His eyes, usually so calm in the courtroom, flashed with something more dangerous. Fear, not for himself, but for me. "You're walking into fire, son. I've seen men destroyed in the courts, not because they were wrong, but because they stood against the wrong people." I swallowed hard, staring at the monitor beeping beside my wife's bed. Each beep was her heart fighting. Each beep was a second she was still here. "So what? We just stay quiet, pretend this didn't happen." The silence stretched. My father's gaze softened, but he didn't answer. And that's when I realized the truth. He wasn't just warning me, he was testing me. Would I follow the path of peace he had always preached, the quiet survival strategy of looking the other way? Or would I step into the storm, even if it meant dragging our whole family through the mud? The choice sat heavy in my chest. But then the door opened. It was my younger sister, Hannah. She rushed in, hair messy, eyes red like she'd been crying all the way here. I came as soon as I heard, "How is she?" "Oh my God," she gasped at the sight of my wife, tubes covering her face, machines hissing. I hugged her tight, feeling the tremble in her shoulders, but when she pulled back, her eyes landed on the phone still in my hand. The screenshot, the words. She froze. "Karen sent that?" I nodded. Her face went pale, then dark with rage I'd never seen in her before. "She's sick. She's evil." I looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. "You believe me?" "Of course I believe you," she snapped. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because Dad," I shot him a glance. His face was unreadable. "Dad thinks we should weigh the cost." Hannah turned on him, fury blazing. "Are you kidding me? She almost killed your daughter-in-law and you're worried about politics." My father's lips pressed into a line. "I'm worried about survival. You don't understand how deep this goes, Hannah. Karen has money, influence, and her brother will weaponize it all. The media, the HOA board, the neighborhood, they'll paint us as troublemakers. They'll twist this into our fault." But Hannah wasn't afraid. She stepped closer to him, her voice trembling but strong. "And if we do nothing, what happens the next time Karen decides she doesn't like someone? What if it's another family with a disabled child? What if they don't survive? Are you willing to carry that?" The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of the monitor. My father looked between us, his face cracking for just a moment. "You don't know what it's like to choose truth when loyalty demands silence." I whispered, "Then maybe it's time we break the cycle." Because that's what it was, a cycle. My father had built his whole career on maintaining balance, choosing peace, even if it meant looking away from injustice. But peace had nearly cost me my wife. I couldn't live like that, not anymore. That night, while Hannah sat with my wife, I went downstairs to the hospital cafeteria. The air smelled of burnt coffee and overcooked soup. I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshot again, staring at those 4 words. And then I forwarded them to the police, to the HOA board, to a lawyer friend I trusted. My hands shook, but a strange calm settled over me. The die was cast. When I returned to ICU, my father was waiting, his expression unreadable. "You sent it, didn't you?" "Yes," my voice didn't waver. "Because this isn't about politics, it's about her. It's about my wife breathing because someone decided rules mattered more than her life." He studied me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then we go all the way, but know this, it will cost us everything." I looked at my wife's fragile frame, machines hissing, heart monitor beeping. She's worth everything. The next day, detectives came to the hospital. They asked questions, took my phone, and copied the footage from the security camera my father had watched through. And when they left, Hannah squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing." But the truth was, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like war had just been declared. Because not even an hour later, my father got a call. I could see his face harden as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at me. "Karen knows, and she's already moving. She's filing a harassment complaint against you, says you threatened her after she cut the power." My jaw dropped. "Threatened her? She tried to kill my wife." "She's flipping the narrative," my father said grimly. "Exactly like I warned." I buried my face in my hands, the weight crushing me. And then from behind me, my wife stirred. A weak, raspy sound slipped from her throat, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Her eyes fluttered open. Just barely, but open. And in that fragile, whispered voice, she breathed one word. "Fight." The wife wakes up, whispering, "Fight," cementing the narrator's decision. The battle with Karen now moves beyond survival into full accountability and resolution, with the father forced to choose a side once and for all. Her lips were dry, her voice barely more than a breath, but that single word, fight, was enough to shake me to my core. I leaned over, gripping her hand gently. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes fluttered, closed again, exhaustion dragging her under, but she had spoken. She had chosen, and she had given me my answer. I turned to my father, my voice low but steady. You heard her. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about survival, about truth, about stopping Karen before she buries someone else's family. My father didn't speak at first. He just stared at my wife, pale and fragile under the machines, then back at me. For the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor. The judge, the man who had spent a lifetime hiding behind measured words and careful silence, finally looked uncertain. She's right, he whispered at last. She's stronger than all of us. That moment shifted something in him, in us. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, detective interviews, and late-night strategy sessions. Hannah stayed by my wife's side when I couldn't. My father, reluctantly at first, began pulling strings not to bury the case, but to protect the truth from being buried. Karen struck back hard. She filed complaints, spread rumors through the neighborhood, and tried to frame me as unstable, a man lashing out under stress. Her brother, the councilman, made a public statement about respecting HOA regulations for the good of the community. It was all smoke and mirrors, but dangerous smoke. The first hearing came faster than expected. I walked into that courtroom with my knees shaking, my stomach a knot of fear and rage. Karen sat across from me, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She looked smug, like this was nothing more than a nuisance, a small fire she could stamp out with her heel. But then the detective presented the evidence. The time-stamped footage, the medical records, the text message with her taunt. The room went still. And then my father, sitting not as a judge this time, but as a witness, took the stand. His voice didn't waver as he described what he had seen on the live feed, how he had watched in real time as Karen cut the power to a home where she knew a disabled woman depended on electricity to live. It wasn't just my testimony anymore. It wasn't just my word against hers. It was a judge's word, my father's word. Karen's lawyer stammered, trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. But the evidence was too heavy. The gavel came down and the charges stuck. Attempted manslaughter, criminal negligence, harassment. The HOA board collapsed under the weight of it all. The weeks after the trial were a strange mix of relief and raw wounds. My wife slowly regained strength, but the doctors warned us she'd need therapy, both physical and emotional. Her lungs were fragile now. Her memory had gaps. Sometimes she'd forget what day it was. Sometimes she'd lose her words mid-sentence and stare at me in frustration. But she was alive. And every time she whispered, "I love you," it felt like a miracle I would never take for granted again. Hannah became our rock, visiting often, filling the silence with laughter when the house felt too heavy. My father, though, he changed in quieter ways. The man who had once told me to weigh the cost began showing up more, not as a judge, not as a strategist, but as a dad, bringing soup, reading to my wife when her eyes grew tired, sitting with me in the dark when I thought the fear might crush me. One night, weeks later, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. The room smelled of coffee and rain through the open window. His voice was rough. "You were right. I've spent my life choosing peace over truth, but peace built on silence is just a slow death. I don't want that for you or for her." I met his gaze, the weight of years between us finally lifting. "Then don't go back to silence." He nodded, and I knew he wouldn't. Karen was sentenced. Not as long as I wanted, maybe, but long enough that she wouldn't terrorize anyone else for years. Her brother's influence couldn't save her this time. The neighborhood shifted too. People who had once whispered about rules and compliance began knocking on my door, some apologizing, some thanking us for standing up when they hadn't had the courage. It was strange, vindicating, lonely too, because standing for truth often means standing apart. But we weren't alone. My wife's therapists worked miracles, and though she carried scars, literal and invisible, she faced them with a quiet courage that humbled me. Sometimes she'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "Still here," and I'd whisper back, "Always." Months later, I sat on the porch of our home, the same porch where Karen had once smirked in victory. The air was cool, the night alive with crickets, the hum of the ventilator gone because my wife no longer needed it except on her hardest days. She sat beside me, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the stars. Hannah was inside, laughing on the phone. My father was upstairs, reading in the guest room. We were scarred, we were tired, but we were whole. I looked at my wife, at the fragile but fierce light in her eyes, and I realized something. Karen hadn't just cut our power. She'd cut through illusions, about safety, about silence, about the cost of peace. And in the end, she had given me a gift without meaning to. The gift of knowing what matters most. Family truth, the strength to fight even when it's terrifying. I'll never forget the smell of antiseptic in that hospital, the sound of the ventilator failing, the look in my father's eyes when he realized silence was no longer an option. But more than that, I'll never forget my wife's whisper, fight. Because that one word saved us all. If you were in my shoes, if someone threatened your family and the world told you to stay silent, would you risk everything to fight back, or would you choose peace? Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and your voice makes them matter.